Welcome back to the Motorcyclist Podcast, where we talk about motorcycles and everything that makes them great. As always, the topics on this podcast change constantly, but the one thing that remains is two-wheeled fun. On this episode, we are going to talk about beginner bikes. These are going to be talking into different categories of what we think are great beginner motorcycles. Adventure, standards, nakeds, sport bikes. And we're going to talk about 3 or 4 in every category. Then we're going to talk about some recent technical innovations that have made the beginner class so much better. And then we might get into some electric bikes and the evolution of small displacement bikes and how they are not just for new riders anymore. So, as always, we start off with introductions. We've got Adam Wahid, editor. We've got in-market editor, Bradley Adams. And you got myself, Justin Dawes, executive editor. We always start off with what we've been riding this week. So, Bradley, what are you riding this week?
I've been riding a bike that is unfortunately not going to be on this list, which maybe could be. It's actually tucked in behind you over there, and that is the Triumph Daytona 660. And somewhere over there, yeah, not the 400, behind it.
It's almost back. It's kind of behind that Triumph.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm kind of torn on that bike because a great little motorcycle, and I know what Triumph was trying to do. I wish they didn't use the Daytona name, but that thing is so street oriented. It is so soft. I'm a big guy, 200 pounds, 6'3", and I just like the suspension. I just overload it completely, and it's so soft. And I know that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to build a proper a street bike. They don't even, it's fully fared, but they don't really plan on people going to the track with it. And just not really the bike for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that they use the Daytona name, but also not interesting. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago to the Daytonas that came out then, they were pretty soft and chunky, and they weren't high performing track models. They were sporty, but they weren't as focused as the Daytonas that had disappeared a few years ago. So I'm okay with the using in the name. I'm pumped that Triumph has made a bike that is maybe not so hard edged. It's a little more comfortable. Granted, it is soft, but the rest of it, I think they did a good job on.
Yep. And we will say they have been doing some good stuff, because that bike in front of it, that 400, which I think maybe we might talk about later, I can't remember, but yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a good one. So
one of my favorites of 2024 for sure. Adam, what about you? What's your jam this week?
I've been riding the 2024 KTM 890 Adventure R, so KTM's middleweight adventure touring bike, and wow, that thing is just a hoot to ride, especially off-road.
It is a shredder. It's amazing that, well, I guess it's not amazing. It's a KTM, right? Their dirt bike heritage shines through on almost every product they have, and it really does on their middleweight adventure bikes.
Yeah, right now too, like those things, they imported a little bit too many, so you can purchase one of those things for around $12,000 if you look not too hard, and that's a really good deal for that bike. $12,000, my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be hard at all to find one of those and get a good smoking deal. Especially with the current financial situation with KTM. But there's been some news on the horizon where they're kind of fixing things, and but they have nearly an entire year's worth of product sitting in warehouses, so prices might get lower.
$1,000 890 Adventure R. I really like it.
I might hold off for another few weeks if I was if I was shopping for a KTM to see if I could get even a better deal.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, this week I rode the Himalayan 450, Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. And we will be talking about that a little later. So I won't give too much away, but we did a test yesterday, and we put it through its paces pretty gnarly. In fact, we rode some pretty hard single track on it. So we started on the street and went all the way, every gamut of adventure bike terrain until we got to riding some single track, and I actually jumped it on a motocross track as well. So
That's awesome.
rad.
so it, like we will be talking about later, it's just they're not always just for beginners. There's some really nice things about that Himalayan 450, but we'll cover that later. So as always, our list can differ from your list, and we would love to hear what you think and what you want to say about beginner bikes. So, put comments down below. Tell us what you think is a good beginner bike, or a beginner bike that you bought, or if you are a beginner, ask some questions and we'll respond back and maybe help you figure out what to ride and where to go in your journey of becoming a motorcyclist, right? So with that, let's get into it.
Okay, we're gonna break this down. What, Justin, you're gonna do adventure bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Adam will do standards, and I'll do sport bikes. We'll kind of have it chaptered a little bit that way, right?
Yeah, usually we trade off and we kind of skip around, but we're gonna segment this so it's easier to digest, so we're not bouncing around and you're like, wait, is that an adventure bike or a sport bike? Or so we're gonna start with adventure bikes, and that's my jam. I am an adventure bike lover. I'm old. I used to be a dirt bike racer, so adventure bikes are my jam. They're awesome for old guys that maybe still have some dirt skills left. So
That's an interesting but probably pretty accurate way of putting it, I guess.
there are a lot of dirt bikers that have gone to adventure bikes and they love them. And there's also beginners getting into adventure biking because it is one of the segments that is it's the most versatile segment, in my opinion, of any motorcycle. You can go on-road, you can go off-road, you can go touring. Some of them are very sporty. They're comfortable. I mean, you could even if you were like really gnarly, you could take it to the track, but maybe not with the beginner ones. But you take an 890 to the track with some street tires on it, it probably rips, right?
Or like KTM did with his 1290 in the press kit materials. Remember we talked about that?
That's right. The 1290 KTM S, or the S model, not one picture of that bike in the dirt, but they had a bajillion pictures of it at a racetrack, banging off curbing, wheeling through apexes, so there are adventure bikes that are definitely street worthy. So let's start with my first one. It is the CF Moto Ibex 450. In other parts of the world, it's called the MT 450. Parallel twin, small adventure bike, but it kind of ticks all the boxes of almost a larger adventure bike with power that's less aggressive, a little bit lower seat height. It's not that much shorter, and it's lightweight, but it's big enough for travel. And Bradley, you spent a lot of time on that bike at the press launch.
Yeah, no, I did. It's funny because, man, you can approach this bike from so many angles. It's like relatively aggressive adventure bike. You could even compare it in some cases, like when we went and rode it, you're almost comparing it to like a Yamaha Tenere 700 in some ways. But then at the same time, you're comparing it to smaller things as well, like the 300cc, lightweight adventure bikes. And it's kind of in this middle ground, but I think that's cool for newer riders. I think one of the things for newer riders, especially, is you want a bike that you're not going to outgrow right away.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I think this is friendly enough. It's got, enough rider aids and things like that to get out and do some really good riding and have that kind of electronic support. But then at the same time, it's not too big and cumbersome. And I think we might talk about this later too, but that engine is really good. They use that in a couple different platforms, and it's so lively. It's got so much character. It sounds great. And so it's entertaining too, which I think is cool. And obviously all of the CF Moto stuff, they do a really good job on pricing. It's not like, massively cheaper than the other stuff, but it's priced right too. So to get into adventure bikes, for sure, I think this is a great option.
Yeah, I see it as a very solid value. We dynoed the naked bike with the 450, but I don't remember what the power output was on it.
Yeah, the only story I have there is talking to Big E at Yoshimura,
Mm-hmm.
and they were doing some test stuff with their naked bike, the CF Moto naked bike, and they said they put an exhaust on that thing, and he said that was one of the coolest sounding bikes that they've done in a long time. Which says a lot, because they go through a lot of bikes, testing
They
stuff
do
out
go through
and
a
stuff.
lot of bikes.
And he was just tickled with how that thing sounded. It's got like this almost as like motocross style thump to it. But yeah, I mean, obviously with an entry level machine, you're looking for more things than just character and noise and things like that. But it is a really good bike. There's just a lot to like about that thing. Yeah, I think it's a good avenue into adventure bike riding. Like I said, it's not small like a 300 necessarily. It's got a little size to it, but and actually, I should say one of the things I do remember from that event was they purposely put like a big tank and stuff on it because they wanted it to feel like a full size motorcycle. So
yeah, and it does, and it has the stance of a full size motorcycle too. Like you look at it and you go, no one would go, oh, that's like some beginner kiddie bike. You know what I mean? Like it's a bike that, as a beginner, you could buy. And you could keep it for years and years and years, and it's going to do the job that you want it to do, and you're not going to be bummed on it after a year of owning that motorcycle. You're not going to outgrow it, and that's the really cool part about this motorcycle is they brought a package that is friendly to beginners, but also can grow with you and can satisfy, skilled riders and riders with experience. And that's why it really topped my list of beginner adventure bikes, is just because of the value and the ability to amortize your purchase over many, many, many years instead of buying it for a year and then going, man, I'm going to move to a Tenere, or I'm going to move to a V-Strom 800, or I'm going to move to, whatever. I don't think you're going to really run into that too quickly on this bike.
Right. Like you might with a Versus 300X or a KTM 390 Adventure, things like that. Which
Yeah, and
great
even
bikes, but
KTM 390 Adventure is pretty rad, but it still is smaller. Now, the new one that's coming out, we don't know for sure, but stance-wise, it's bigger. So we may have the same discussion about the 390 Adventure in a few months' time. But right now, CF Moto Ibex 450, that's number one on my list. Second one, you just mentioned, Bradley, CRF 300L Rally. Adam, you love your CRFs in almost every shape or form. Have you ridden this CRF 300L Rally or the L, either or?
I think I've ridden the CRF 250L, not the 3. No, I think I've ridden the CRF 300L. We rode it with Evan one time in Ocotillo. And yeah, they're nice bikes. The rally specifications is especially pretty. Like, wow, that bike. Talk about, big bike looks on a, small MSRP price tag.
Yeah, and it's rally bike looks. That's the radness of it. We're sticking away from mentioning exact prices because right now you can find deals on motorcycles. So we're just going to talk about most of these have low prices and attainable prices, but we're not going to say it costs this much because in the comments we'll get, oh, I found it for $500 less, or what are you talking about? That's crazy. My dealer charged $800 more for setup or whatever. So we're going to stick away from pricing for the most part, but it looks like a rally bike. It has some shrouding on it that makes it look like it has rally tanks. Doesn't have the fuel capacity of a rally bike. It doesn't have any tanks in that area. And it's built off the 300L. So it shares a lot of parts of the 300L, but it just looks cooler and it has wind protection, right? So it's a 300cc single. It's got a very, very friendly power delivery, but it can still get up and go and get out of its own way and move through traffic on freeways, all that kind of stuff, cover big distances. And it's a Honda. You could ride that thing to Timbuktu and break it in the middle of Azerbaijan, and you're going to find a Honda dealer and get parts for it. If it breaks, it's a Honda. It probably won't even ever break. You could run it on bad gas. You could run it out of oil. You could not lube the chain, and it's still going to probably run just fine.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why. I don't know the numbers as of now, but for a while, that 300 lineup was best-selling dual sport, of all dual sports, right?
Yeah, of all dual sports in America for a while, it was the winner. And it's because it's, one, it's a Honda, two, it is a good value, and three, it looks rad. You know, it really
awesome.
looks good. I rode one a few months ago. My neighbor actually bought one, and we just made some changes to make it fit his stature. He's really tall and long-legged, so we did some seat stuff and some handlebar stuff, and I rode it around, and I go, this thing's cool. Like it handles well. It feels like a dirt bike. It feels like a dual sport almost more than an adventure bike. It feels light. You can throw it around, and it's got tons of room, you know. So it is a little bit tall, though. I mean, I will say that for a beginner, that can be a sticking point. You know, when you're a new rider, being able to touch the ground is super important to people.
I don't know because I know it's not in our notes, but didn't Honda, they have a 300L low seat now? I don't think they have the Rally low seat.
They don't have a Rally low seat, but they have an L low.
Yeah.
So, you know, but
Good point, though.
It's a good point to always, you know, as you learn to ride, you figure out that you can slide your butt over. If you get 1 foot down, you're good, you know. But as you're learning, it's really important to be able to reach the ground when you're trying to figure out how to stop and go and catch yourself on uneven terrain and those things. So that is one of the holdbacks. If you're a shorter rider, it's not going to be for you.
Fair. That's kind of in line with most adventure bikes anyways.
With
so if you are kind of shopping in that space, it is something to think about. I think when the Ibex, we didn't mention, they have a system where at the shock linkage, you can actually, there's like 2 positions and you can lower the bike that way, which is another cool thing about that bike. I think adjustability is great.
Which is really cool because rather than adjusting the preload to get it to sit, you can still have the correct preload and have the correct seat height, which is a really nice feature. Yeah. So, but the next bike, seat height might not be an issue. And that's the bike that I rode just yesterday. And that's the Himalayan 450, Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. I am going to mention the price on this bike because it is insanely inexpensive. $5,999 for the one that I was riding, the black and gold paint scheme. Tube tires, they have a tubeless option. But it's got a really low seat height. It's got a new liquid cooled single with almost 40 horsepower. It's the same engine. It's a Sherpa 2 engine. It's used in the Gorilla 450 as well. And I rode the Gorilla 450 in Spain last year in Barcelona, and I really enjoyed riding that bike. It's got a nice torquey character, but also a friendly delivery. You've got ABS. You've got, you know, just a very limited rider aid selection, but you don't need it because the engine is so easy to use. And then you're looking at a bike that has a cool look to it and has the capability to go adventure bike riding with a lower seat height.
What's the fit and finish like on that thing? I haven't really got my hands on any of the newer Royal Enfields. Just switch gear, all that stuff. Do you feel like wires?
It's more modern. I mean, there's still a little messiness in the handlebar wires and things like that, but overall, much improved from older. Like even compared to the previous Himalayan, this new one, much better, much cleaner design. Switch gears better. I will say that they made an odd choice with the brake and clutch levers. They're kind of fat, like cruiserish, rather than skinny like you would for like a dirt bike or an off-road model. But overall, really nice fit and finish. The paint looks pretty good. And it's just a cool looking bike. You know, it's got a single round headlight, which kind of goes back to the old school look, but then it's got more modern shapes on the tank and everything else. It's got plenty of storage on it. It's got a rack that comes on it standard, and then it has crash bars on it standard around the tank that have little D-rings to mount bags to the crash bags.
That's cool.
As well.
Yeah.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, we beat the heck out of it yesterday. We did a long street ride, had a really good time. I haven't calculated the fuel economy yet by filling up the tank and doing the math, but on the gauge, it was saying 62 miles per gallon, which gives that thing, you know, a 200-ish mile range, if not a 250 mile range which is good for an adventure bike. So suspension is excellent, non-adjustable, only preload adjustment in the rear, and even with my weight, I'm like 230. It's amazing. It's really good. Everyone that's ridden it is like Showa did and Royal Enfield did a really good job with suspension on this bike being non-adjustable. You would not think that it's an inexpensive motorcycle.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, that's a solid list. I don't think, I mean, you know, other people might vary in terms of what they would like in terms of a beginner adventure bike, but I don't think you're going, you know, regretting a decision if you go with either of those three.
Yeah. I really tried to give like a modern adventure bike, like high tech adventure bike, which is the Ibex 450, something that is stone axe reliable and well proven. That's the Honda, and then something for shorter riders that are worried about touching the ground, and that's the Himalayan. All these bikes, you wouldn't be bummed buying any of these bikes.
Solid
Agreed.
selection.
Solid list. What you got, Adam? What you got? You're on naked bike duty, right? Standards, as we like to call them.
Yeah, standard / naked bikes. You know, I'm a big fan of, even if I wasn't a beginner, but this is very beginner friendly, is Honda CB300R, which came out a couple years ago. You know, that thing's just south, I think, of $6,000, and I just love that bike. That bike punches well above its weight. You know, it's crazy light. It has extremely good fit and finish and quality. It's very easy to, you know, quote unquote manhandle and just like have fun on for a little bike. It gets great gas mileage. It looks awesome. I mean, that bike's got a lot going for it. And if you were a new rider, even if you were a more experienced rider and you just needed a bike that maybe you weren't going to strictly just ride on the freeway all the time, that CB300R would be a really good fit.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the cool things about that, and I think we're going to talk about it later, Honda a couple years ago, they made a big push with reducing the weight in some of their chassis, a lot of the spars on that thing, and saved a bunch of weight, and that's where you're getting all that agility, which I think for a new rider is great. The less weight, quicker steering, all that is, I mean, nothing but good for a newer rider who's kind of, you know, getting things figured out.
Yeah,
it's a cool
it's
crazy
looking bike,
how light
dude.
that thing is.
Yeah, it is. You pick that thing up off the side stand. Like getting off the side stand is like feather light. Like it's just, you know, to move it back and forth from side to side. Like that's a really good feature to have for someone that's learning to ride. Like even just getting a bike off a side stand when you're inexperienced and learning to ride can be a daunting task until you get the hang of it, right? And when the bike is light like that, you just go whoop. You're like, oh, I can. It just boosts your confidence. Absolutely.
It does. And like you said, Justin, the styling. I mean, that Neo Sports Cafe styling package, like the ode to the old, you know, CB generation from the 60s and 70s with a modern twist. Like, I love Honda Neo Sports Cafe bikes. In my opinion, they're the best representation of modern cafe styling. I mean, you know, XSR 900 does a really good job, but in my opinion, the CB Neo Sports Cafe is even more tasteful looking.
Yeah, I dig the styling as well. It's like I always see it as like it's like a retro robot in a way. Like the shapes, like it always reminds me of like a robot that you would like see like in a movie in the 70s, 60s, you know.
The flat surfaces and stuff.
Flat surfaces, but there's still some roundness to the flatness. Like it's just really cool.
I think so too. And it comes with all LED lighting. You know, it's got, you know, somewhat modern amenities that, you know, are a good value for the price.
Does it still have an LCD gauge or is it gone TFT yet?
That's a great question. I don't recall if they've added a TFT to that particular model. You know, they had that old school monochrome thing, which is kind of curious. It's not maybe the best, but you know, a few years ago when it came out, it was okay. But now everything's TFT. That if it doesn't have a TFT, oh man, it's going to be hurting against the competition. I mean, even like the 390 Duke has a really nice color TFT.
That's
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 not that much more.
that's one thing I forgot about that Himalayan, which is really rad, is it has a round gauge, but it is TFT. You can change the style, and it has the Tripper app, which you put on your phone, and it uses Google for navigation and will cast the Google map onto that round dash and give you not only turn by turn but actual guidance, like you expect to see in your car and stuff. And it's powered by Google, which that's a big plus for a lot of people that are trying to find the way around instead of using some proprietary less less accurate app, that a lot of the manufacturers use because they don't want to pay Google. Royal Enfield just did it, and it's such a better experience.
Absolutely.
It's your Google talks to you.
That's funny. Yeah, it knows.
Google's talking to me. It's
Technology.
like,
That's so funny.
it
That was
agreed
really
with
funny.
me. It agreed with me.
Yeah.
It said absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh,
More
right.
people should be on Google platform. Yeah.
Tell everyone.
Yeah.
Obey your Google masters.
Ha 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 ha.
Anyway, let's get to your next one then.
My next bike that I really enjoy, it's kind of crazy because it's already an outdated model, but I still really like it, is Kawasaki's Z400. Of course, for 2025, they have for 2024, they have the Z500. So, a little bit punched out engine, but that Z400 naked bike, geez, I remember we did a ride on that thing, a comparison, I think, with Evan in 2019 when that model first came out. And what a fun little bike, twin cylinder. So maybe the only real gripe I have with the CB300R, it's really not a gripe because the bike's so light and fun, but generally a single cylinder engine. Usually, if you can get 2 cylinders, it's always better. And that Z400 has a nice parallel twin. And it's still really light, and it's got nice packaging. It's narrow. It's got a short wheelbase. Seat height's low. The styling, it's kind of love it or hate it. I like that, Japanese Kawasaki modern styling it has. But that bike's just a hoot to ride. You can do wheelies on it. It just does everything, and it's got that twin cylinder powertrain. So, of course, it's not going to be awesome on the freeway, but it's going to be a little bit better than the CB300.
Oh yeah, I mean it goes good enough, especially now that it's not really a 500, it's a 451. They call it a 500. It gets down, like, if you want to wring its neck, it'll do almost 100 miles an hour. Granted, if you're on the freeway and you're keeping up with Southern California traffic at 80 miles an hour, you're spinning the thing, you know what I mean? But it'll do it, and it's totally fine. And I've just like you, when it came out as the 400, I dug that thing. I mean, it was just, we did a track day with a bunch of bikes, and we had we had the Ninja 400 at that time, not the 4-cylinder, but the 2-cylinder, and that bike, and I think I rode the Z400 more than any other bike we had at our disposal, which included leader bikes and supermotos, and we had like 40 or 50 bikes there, and I think I took that thing out for 2 sessions at least, maybe 3, because it's just fun.
It's
Comfortable.
totally it's totally fun. Again, just like the CB300R, these bikes, they have lower price tags, and they're engineered more or less for newish beginner riders, but they're not. They punch above their weight. They're not. You could be a more experienced rider, like you're just saying, and rip these things and have a great time. And that's the cool thing, especially with traffic and crazy in all parts of the United States. Picking up one of these bikes for $5,000 to use as just an urban commuter, it really makes a lot of sense, especially if you want to save money, have a smile on your face, and just do something maybe new and exciting.
There's a little advertisement for motorcycling in general right there. Good one, Adam.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Well, let's get, we all agree, I think, on that bike, as we have on almost all these bikes thus far. No one's pushed back at all at our choices. So let's hear your last one.
The final one is another big Japanese manufacturer, which was updated stylistically, I believe, last year, the MT-03. So Yamaha's, parallel twin naked bike. Thing kind of was looking long in the tooth, and they recently updated it to make it look more like the MT-09. And gosh, that thing, we haven't ridden the new one yet, but like that bike just looks awesome. That little parallel twin, again, it's got a twin cylinder engine, so it's going to have pep for highway use, really low MSRP, right around, $5,000. Like, I mean, at this point, you basically have to pick your favorite color because that's how good all these bikes are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I rode, it would be the kind of the same chassis as the new one. I haven't ridden the facelifted one yet. But I was really impressed with the stability and the handling of that bike. The engine power it's okay. Like when you compare,
it's lackluster.
yeah, but it's friendly and it's usable. Like, we're talking from, we got to remember here, we're looking at beginner bikes and we're talking about friendly power, and it does have friendly power. But from an expert's point of view, you do notice a difference between that and like a Ninja 400 or 500. And it has power characteristics more like a CB 300 than it does a twin that it would be compared to. And that doesn't make it a bad bike because the handling on it is phenomenal. It's so light to throw around, and it really, if you're going to ride a lot of like twisty roads, it may be one of the best choices you can get.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool. I haven't ridden one recently. Yeah, especially with any updates. But yeah, I think that being comfortable on a bike that's gives you kind of that confidence as a new rider is so big. So big. Weight's a big part of that. Weight's a big part of that.
Weight is a big part of it. But also, with the reduction in weight, sometimes you get a little more flighty characteristics when you get into some of the lighter bikes. And this bike is rock solid. Like it really boosts your confidence in cornering at low speed and high speed because of the chassis.
What do you guys think of the Yamaha MT styling thing in current wears?
It's how do we put it? It's polarizing. Personally, not my cup of tea, but it's such a subjective thing that, there's plenty of people that love the MT, the Master Torque, Dark Side of Japan styling. So for me, I don't dig it, but that's a totally personal opinion. Has no bearing on the performance.
As a side question, just of the three bikes, the CB300R, the Z400, now Z500, and MT-03, which one is your favorite styling, in your opinion? Both you guys.
I'd probably say the CB. The only thing I don't like about the Yamaha is it's got that big tail section, and I don't think they've really updated that. And it always looks like just like an older bike. Like honestly, every time I look at it, looks like one of those bikes from the 90s with a big old tail section on it. Is the only thing for me. But I do like the new look. Yeah, exactly. I do like the new headlight cowl that they have for it. Yeah, I do. I think they've made some improvements there for sure, and it's a better looking bike than it was before. I think probably the Kawasaki styling might be my least favorite. I think it's that's the one they do the Tsugomi styling.
Styling,
right?
Correct.
And probably my least favorite of the group. I don't mind. I like the new direction they've gone with the MT stuff. Yeah.
How about you, Justin?
It's the Honda for sure. The Honda looks the best. Like if you were to line them all up and just be like, pick the best looking one, it's not even a contest. The Tsugomi styling is very insect-like or animal-like, and it's got some weirdness in the front cowl to me, the way that the headlights are low and pushed out. Like, Kawai's done that for quite a long time with that pushed front headlight lower than the rest of it.
That's a great observation.
It looks like an underbite to me, like if that makes sense. Like it looks like an underbite. And then the MT, like it's too robotic, and I'm not I'm also not digging that one that much, and I never have, to be honest. But that Honda they got that right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
fair enough. Bradley, I think you're up. What's your favorite uh, machines for beginner riders?
All right. So yeah, I preface this by say, I'm doing sport bikes, right? And so I think the needs, I don't know if the needs change a little bit, but, and maybe I'm just setting up for my first bike, which is the Aprilia RS457, um, which is different from what we've seen, I think, in recent years on small bikes because it's a lot more aggressive and sporty than a lot of the other bikes in the class. Maybe hold for the Kawasaki's, but it's just what Aprilia does, right? They build proper sport bikes, and I think we talked about it on an episode before, where the thing about the 457, it's a new bike for them, but they're pulling so much from what they've done and learned with RS660, and in some cases, maybe even RSV4. And they've basically built a lightweight sport bike that, in a lot of ways, puts track riding first. I would say it's funny
Sort of. I
because
mean, yeah, sort of, but it's also a very usable motorcycle for everyday stuff, and that's
yeah,
what you want for a beginner sport bike. But you can take that thing to the track and have a grand time.
yes. So to that point, absolutely the best chassis I have ever ridden on a small displacement sport bike. Obviously when they're building these small bikes, they're looking at cost, weight, and things like that. And so sometimes you get these kind of little, flexi flyer type things that, soft and move around a bunch. The chassis on that thing is incredible. If you are a new rider and, you're like, hey, I want to be going to the track, that's where I want to be learning there. That is absolutely the bike to go. And it's a little bit more expensive for sure. I'll admit. You're kind of paying for that performance and the Aprilia branding and stuff, but I think the one thing that came up when we were doing the testing was, and you mentioned this earlier with the Ibex, it feels like one of those bikes. It's a beginner friendly, small displacement bike that you won't grow out of right away.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of amortize in that cost a little bit more. Because I think you can spend an extra year or so on the bike than you would on, a CBR 300 or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, you got all the
absolutely.
electronics.
Well said.
Yeah. In my opinion, it's the best looking Aprilia sport bike that they have.
Adam was just here the other day and he took a look at that thing, and yeah, he was like, that thing's gorgeous. And yeah, I agree. I've not met any person who didn't just wasn't drawn to the looks of that thing.
We
Yeah, I
we
went
talked about
to
it a couple episodes ago about, how good of a job they did, mimicking the styling of that particular product with the top dog of them all, the RSV4.
Mhm. Yeah, but it's better looking than the RSV4. Like I think it's more refined looking. The proportions are better. I went to Mazzano in 23 when they introduced that bike to the world, and we did a bunch of social media, and there were so many questions. So like, will that bodywork fit on my RS660? When will this RS660 look like this? And that goes to show that the styling is, they nailed it. But there's so much more about that bike that's just so good for a beginner rider. You know, power wise, it's got traction control, it's got ride modes, it's got 2 levels of ABS, it's got all this technology that's in a big bike at a small bike price, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's funny commenting on, or I should say, going back to what we said about it being a little bit more aggressive. Evan was commuting on the thing, and you guys know Evan weighs like 120 pounds, right? So most of the small bikes, they're pretty softly sprung and things like that, and it's like right up his alley. It's great for him. And he rode that thing, and he's like, I feel like a little bit of like a stiffness to it riding down the freeway. It's like, and Aprilia admits, like when they developed it, they didn't want to build this super soft thing, this package, right? So, and it's not overly stiff, but like, yeah, it's definitely something where they've got it tuned where if you do want to go ride the thing at the track, it's got that support and hold up. So yeah, lots of things to consider there. Again, price and that aggression, maybe it's not for everybody, but it's hands down the best beginner sport bike. I think
It's for every beginner sport bike rider.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Which, excuse me, leads me into the next one, my next bike, which is the Kawasaki Ninja 500. I feel so bad for that bike because that thing has always been, the Ninja has always been the king of the class. And now with that new 451cc engine, I think it's even better, but it hasn't gotten any attention because that Aprilia has just totally stolen the limelight this last year.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
For sure.
That's a really good point.
Kawasaki's Small Ninja has been helping beginning riders get into sport bike riding forever.
Since the 80s.
Since the 80s, since the 250. And it's always been a parallel twin. That's the rad part about it, is even when it was a 250, it was a parallel twin, and that gave it some usability that wasn't there for some singles, and it was a sport bike. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of small sport bikes that were like, oh, I can get that and I can enjoy that, So
Remember, Justin, how long that original incarnation of that Ninja 250R was in production?
Yeah, I mean,
decades.
Decades. I remember when I used to work at Kawasaki, and when I started working there in 96, it still had the old bodywork style. It wasn't until the middle 2000s, like 2005 or something, that they changed the bodywork, and it was still a 250, but now it had a new shape. So they ran it for a long time, and they were able to offer it at a very low price because they never changed.
Yeah. And now they're doing quite the opposite and updating them with great frequency, which is so wild.
Yeah, but that's the thing. When the public is really paying attention to this class of beginner bike, the innovation has to come faster and quicker because there's competition. There used to not be a competition for a Ninja 250, really, And even when it was a Ninja 300, there was not much until the CBR 250 came out, and that kind of stuff, the GSXR 250 or GS 250 or whatever it was called, which was much less performance, even though it was wrapped in bodywork, So innovation is really pushing these bikes forward, and especially, like you said, the Ninja 500. It just gets better and better.
Yeah. I was really curious to try out that new engine, and obviously Honda's done a really good job with their 500 platform. And I had ridden at the time, I think it was the SCL 500. I was like, yeah, this engine's great, for what it is. And then I got on that new 451 from Cowie, and I'm like, oh, this engine's way better. Just all aspects, the way the power's delivered, the torque on it, the transmission. I think Kawasaki has the better engine. So that's why I kind of avoided, the CBR platforms. And then I also was looking at, the CF Moto 450SS. I do think that's a great bike for the price, and it's got some styling. But the Kawasaki, just fit and finish and overall refinement and quality, I think is higher than the CF Motos. I know it is higher than the CF Motos.
I will say, last night when we were driving back from testing that Himalayan, on the freeway, there was a Ninja 500 and a CF Moto next to each other. And at night, the CF Moto looked sick. It looked really nice.
Yeah.
But I would still be probably taking the Kawasaki as well. I think what's cool about the Kawasaki also is Kawasaki gives you so many options in their beginner motorcycles to kind of tailor what you want out of them. They have like an SE model, they have an ABS, they have a non-ABS, so you can get into that bike for a lower price point if you're willing to forego some modern things like ABS and stuff like that.
Yeah, because and then you can go up to the SE model and you get your TFT display and stuff like that. So, it's like I said, it's a little unfortunate that bike has gone under the radar this past year, only because that Aprilia's came in and has been so good. But man, a Ninja 500, it really is a good option for if you're shopping in the sport bike space.
That's right. And if you want to get into the Ninja ecosystem, right? Like it's
that's huge for
it's
them.
a thing, right?
That's a good one.
Yep.
A lot of people, if they buy a lime green bike, they're going to stay lime green forever. They kind of identify with that bike.
Yep.
In a way. So
that is a big thing for Kawasaki. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Capture them and keep them.
Yep. Which again, segue to the next one, a company that does a lot with the family. They're our family, which is the Yamaha. And yes, I guess I don't know if I said it. It's R7 is on my list.
Beginner
which,
bike. It's bumping up on. Well, it is middleweight. It's not. It could be not a beginner bike. So I want to know why you think this thing's a beginner bike.
Yeah, and so I kind of did put it on the list so that we can have this kind of talk, which is I think that with the user friendliness of these modern parallel twins, I think it's led to bikes that a new rider can get on and with some electronic rider aids and great fuel injection, things like that you can get onto a bike that maybe is a little bit bigger and maybe just barely outside your comfort zone initially, but it's not so overwhelming. And the reason I actually picked the R7 versus any other bikes in this category, it is technically down on power a little bit compared to, something like the GSX 8R, which we compared it to last year. And those bikes do have just a little bit more punch. I feel like the R7, the way it makes its power, or that CP2, which we obviously all love that engine. I think it's still user-friendly enough that a newer rider can get on it. And there's going to be, it's going to be a little bit more of a learning curve for sure than getting on an R3. But I do think that bike is friendly enough that a new rider can get on. And I'm kind of curious to hear your guys' thoughts and that's kind of why I wanted to put it on this list. I think that's where we're at right now, is that you can get on these bikes.
I see where you're coming from. And then when you look at Yamaha's lineup, you jump from an R3 to an R7. There's nothing in between. They don't have an R500 or something like that. So, and I think if you were shopping for a Yamaha, if you wanted a Yamaha YCF R model and you're beginner, yeah, I could see the R7 being a really good option over the R3, just because you're going to live with it longer because it has enough performance and all that stuff to grow into. So I get it. It is a bit simpler than some of the other middleweight parallel twins, which I think is a good thing as a beginner. So I'm cool with that as well. So yeah, okay.
Yes.
I'm still a little I'm still a little torn.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be the first. I'll say this: it's not going to be the first beginner sport bike I'm going to recommend to anybody.
No, for sure. And I think it's a little bit dependent on people's experience. If you kind of grew up, maybe riding a little bit off road, it's it's been 10 years, but when I was a kid, I used to ride something around in the desert or something like that. I don't know. And just if it's your first motorcycle ever and your first miles on a bike, no, obviously I'd probably recommend something else. But if I've got a little bit of an understanding of motorcycles, I rode some dirt bikes when I was a kid growing up, things like that. It's my first street bike. I do think there's an argument to be made for a bike like this. And I don't know if this is a good argument or not, but let's be honest, looks and style and everything is really important on a motorcycle. You want a bike that makes you feel cool and look cool. And I think the R7, has that. Obviously, Yamaha spent a lot more time developing that as, kind of a proper sport bike versus, a true entry level thing like the R3. So,
yeah. Adam, what do you think on this argument? Like, you can be the tiebreaker here because I'm on the fence. So you're going to sway me one way or the other.
Well, I'd say American riders speak with their wallets, and I see a lot of those vehicles on the road. A lot of YZF R7s on the road. So, I think to Bradley's point, if you have absolutely no experience, operating a power sports vehicle, YZF R7 is probably not the most optimum option. But if you've ridden some bikes here and there at your friend's cabin or out in the desert, and you're kind of familiar with using, the brake and the clutch and the gear shift lever, I think YZF-R7 is a good fit. And, that character of that 689cc CP2 engine, like, it's just, you release the clutch and put, 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 away it goes. It's a really easy bike to ride. And it's something that you're not going to grow out of, just like, those twin cylinder versus 400, or I'm sorry, Z400, now 500, and the MT-03. You have a little bit more legs underneath you, so you can maybe keep this bike for a couple years.
Okay. All right. I really see what Bradley's doing here. He really likes legit super sport bikes, and that is the closest to a legit super sport bike in a beginner-ish package. So he's trying to get more people to move to super sports, so that at some point there's going to be a new R6 or R800 or something that's even more gnarly than the new R900 or R9 that's coming out. Bradley wants his 4-cylinder super sport bikes back.
Yep. That's it. Let's get people back in. You get on one of those and be like, I own an R. I mean, an R7 looks like an old R6. Like, it's obviously not even close. I shouldn't say not close to the performance, but it's not.
It's not
an R6, but at the same time, you see
what like one.
Adam's point. Yeah, you see guys riding down the road on it, you see people on them, and you're like, that's a really good looking motorcycle. And if you're a new rider, like, you're new to motorcycling, it's your first bike, and you're like, I'm proud to own this thing.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fair point, and that'll keep you engaged longer if you're proud to own it. So, okay, I agree.
Nice.
I agree. Barely, but I agree. So, that's the end of our lists. But let's talk about, like, I think there's a overarching theme to all these bikes, and it's the technology and bike manufacturing has gotten so awesome that all these bikes have become more practical, more versatile, and better for all ranges of riders. Like, it's no longer when you were beginning to ride a motorcycle, you bought this piece of junk and you were like almost embarrassed to ride it in a way. And then after a while you outgrew it and it felt cheap and the fit and finish wasn't good because it was a beginner bike. Now these bikes are polished. They're awesome. They have tons of technology in them, so, how do you guys weigh in on that subject?
Well, I think the thing for me is the fact I used to find it kind of funny when all of a sudden you got traction control and lean sensitive traction control on the newer lightweight bikes. And at first you might think it's silly, but I think the biggest thing is having that safety net. The most important thing is getting newer riders through that first couple years without an incident. Right. And because when you're a newer rider and you have a crash, either, mentally it's going to, weigh on you, and or family, friends are gonna be like, see, I told you shouldn't do it. And then that's when people stop, park their bike, they sell it, and they are no longer a motorcyclist.
Yep. I had to hang it up. I had a low side.
Yep, exactly. So, I think electronics, again, like I said, it might always seem a little bit silly to have, lean angle sensitive traction control and things like that on these new bikes. But I think electronics have been a huge part of, the advancement of small displacement machines, and are really important aspects of motorcycling. We talked about it in an electronics episode before, where it's in big bikes, at least, it seems to be limiting some crashes, and from what we've seen at events that we go to and stuff. And I think it's the same for small displacement stuff. So really cool to see the electronics come into this space.
Yeah. So Adam, what about there's been a lot of automatic transmissions, and they're making their way. They used to be on the most expensive models only. Now they're making their way down to less expensive models, and the e-clutch technology and stuff. What do you think about that kind of stuff moving into beginner bikes? Is that going to change it even further? Is it going to make it better or worse?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed this a couple episodes ago. It's funny because this past summer, American Honda had its official press introduction for its e-clutch duo, the CB650R and the CBR650R. And it was so funny because they're like, oh yeah, this is what this model needs to sell is e-clutch. This is what they want. And it's like, not really. Like, no one really that's spending $10,000 wants e-clutch, but who probably would be the person who's maybe buying potentially the sub $5,000 CB300R. So, and American Honda hinted that technology is going to trickle down to some of the more affordable options. And for a more affordable option, I think that's a cool feature. In a way, it's kind of, if you could make an argument, well, if you can't use a clutch, maybe you shouldn't be riding, which I'm not going to refute that. But at the same time, it's cool that, companies are leveraging technology to try to make things easier for people.
I am full on behind automatic bikes being an option and available for people. And the old school thought of, I'm going to just call it straight up, it's gatekeeping. Like, to say like, oh, if you can't use a clutch, you shouldn't be riding a motorcycle. Well, everyone forgets when they learn to ride a motorcycle how difficult it was to use a clutch and get it all right. And it took lots and lots of practice. And there was a lot of motorcyclists that get lost in that process and just go, screw it, this ain't for me. It's too hard. It's too scary. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to crash. I'm going to hurt myself. And they just quit, right? And they just say, forget it. And then you have the other side of it where, people put their friend on a new motorcycle and they're like, oh yeah, just give it a go. Just pop the clutch and go. And then they whiskey throttle and they crash into something and then they never ride a motorcycle again. And I think, if there are like automatic options, especially like the e-clutch, where you can shift the bike, you can get off the line easier and you can learn to shift and you can learn to do the things. And it's just going to make the process and the entry much easier than just going, well, if you can't do it, you can't do it. And we don't want you, because that's not good for any of us, because the more motorcycles that sell, the better every motorcyclist is off, because there's more options, there's more money floating around in the space. And then we shouldn't be excluding anyone or looking down on anyone because they can't do something.
Especially, and like we've talked about before, with this new wave of riders coming from that grew up riding these e-bikes, they just don't want to shift. They're riding Surons, things like that, whatever it might be. They've never had to shift riding their electric bikes. And they're like, I just don't want to. It's not that they can't or can't learn. They're just not interested. They're like, no, I kind of like the simplicity of this. So
yeah, and that's fine too. Yeah. Let's get to another aspect of beginner motorcycling as we're winding this thing down, and that's like mini motos and dirt bikes. Bradley, I think that's a really strong place for some people to start.
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny that, we obviously have this whole conversation on beginner bikes and we don't mention like the most entry level machines in some way, which are the mini motos, whether it's a Grom, Trail 125. Honda's mini moto list can go on and on. You got Kawasaki's, you got CF Moto's new, their little Papio and things like that. I'm kind of torn on this because they are great tools for learning the functionality of a motorcycle, how to shift, how to use the clutch. But to me, they're more play things in a way than they are a proper like beginner motorcycle, because I think one of the things, especially in the US and in California, or areas we've got high speed limits and things like that. The speed limit on the street right here by the office is 55 miles per hour. And it's just like, when you have such a small engine and a small package like that, 125cc, you need some acceleration still and some power to get you out of situations,
Sure.
And I don't think these, small mini motos have that. And so in some ways they kind of, I don't know, I definitely don't want to say they put riders at risk, but I think they're great tools for learning.
The usage is limited. The usage case is limited. But I will say that with a mini moto, there is one aspect that I think they're great as a learning tool, is that because they're so small and the wheels are smaller and you're bigger, body position and the way you move makes the bikes move more, and you understand body position and in like movement better on those bikes than on a big bike when you're learning.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because the reaction is amplified. Whatever your action, the reaction is multiplied, and so you begin to understand, oh, if I do this and I push here, the bike does this, and then you can apply that to a bigger bike later.
Yeah. I think I liked how you described them as learning tools. I would describe them as that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend if someone says, I want to go buy a new bike, my first bike, what should I get? I wouldn't recommend a mini moto, again, for the reasons I've mentioned. But like, if you have access to one and can go, in a big parking lot and just, do a little cone course and just, figure out how the clutch and transmission and shifting and things like that, 100%, I would recommend them for new riders in that sense. Yep.
So what about dirt bike, Seed? Like, you're a big dirt bike rider as I am, and what do you think about learning on a dirt bike first?
I mean, it seems like on the West Coast, that's how a lot of people kind of grow up learning how to ride, is kind of in the desert, and, maybe the West Coast is more lucky because it has more public riding areas than the East Coast. So maybe in theory it's easier, but I mean, growing up, learning how to ride on a small displacement off-road bike is a great way to get your feet wet, so to say.
Yeah, and the bikes tend to be more robust to dropping and falling, and right, you're dropping a street bike, you're going to scratch it up, you're going to have to fix it, and you're going to be bummed, and you're going to spend a lot of money. Dirt bike, you bust a lever here and there, you might bend a set of handlebars. If it gets scratched up, so what? It's a dirt bike. I think there's a monetary advantage to learning on a dirt bike, and there's also a mental advantage to learning on a dirt bike, because you don't care as much if you fall down, and falling down helps you learn.
Yeah,
and just the safety thing, like if you're riding in a nice open expanse that's relatively flat with good visibility, like you have a safe place where you don't have to worry about other motorists on the road or pedestrians, and you can kind of do your thing a little bit.
Yeah, you can learn how to operate the thing without the additional outside pressures of worrying about someone else.
Yeah. And let's be honest, we're basically talking about what are defined as trail bikes.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think those bikes, the cool thing is that it's very similar to what we're seeing in the street bike space, where they're advancing in a way, right? And through metallurgy, they're getting lighter. They get fuel injection now, so they're really, user friendly and able. People are able to get on those, and they got a nice solid package to learn on. The CRF 250F. You got the KLX 300s from Kawasaki. Those are excellent bikes to go learn on. I mean, for an adult, right? That's a grown person, not a kid out there, yeah, they're great tools. And so, yeah, if you're a beginner rider, obviously we're not talking necessarily dirt bikes here, but they are great tools for beginner riders. So yeah, really definitely worth mentioning and talking about.
Definitely worth mentioning.
And you can find them on Craigslist for not a lot of money. You can buy a well-used dirt bike that's, even though it's well-used, it's going to be perfectly suited for your application. Learn how to ride on it, sell it. You'll probably not even lose a penny, I bet.
Yeah, there's a lot, especially like a CRF, like 230, 250, whatever, like those air-cooled 250s, Hondas. You might actually make money. Depending on the economy at the time, a few years ago, if you bought one in 2019 and 2021 and 2020, you would have made money on them, so but you're not going to lose much, if anything, buying those bikes. And that's a solid move. So then we're coming to getting new riders into riding. There's a whole nother way of getting people into riding now, and that's electrics. Bradley, like, You've ridden electrics quite a bit. We have a live wire Alpinista here in the office right now. Electrics, man, there's so much going around that space, and they're not replacing motorcycles. But they're a different type of motorcycling. They're not replacing gas motors. They won't for a long time. We know that. Don't send us hate mail of, oh, why are you guys talking about electrics? They help people learn, because you don't have a clutch. They're twist and go.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'll be honest. It's a bit of a brave new world, and I do not know exactly how it's going to impact new riders and motorcycling as a whole just yet. We always say that, like, oh, all these kids growing up on Surons and their e-bikes are going to transition, or likely, transition into motorcyclists, and it'll be interesting to see. I do think, though, that we're going to have a wave of more skilled motorcyclists coming into the industry, because they understand, a twist and go type thing, and applying throttle and modulating power and things like that we didn't necessarily have growing up on BMX bikes, right?
Mhm.
You kind of learned the hard way.
Right. Yeah.
And they've gone through that. So I don't know how it's going to influence motorcycling as a whole, but I do think that electric bikes will change the sport, and especially entry level category, for sure. Yep.
Well said.
Yep. Well, we're gonna wrap this thing up. That's the end of this episode, and I'm sorry to say this is getting close to the end of Bradley Adams being on this podcast. Bradley's going to be moving on, so write some comments to Bradley. Tell him how much you enjoyed his work on
Or not.
Cycle World, on motorcycles, or not, whatever.
Yeah.
Tell him to go. We're glad you're gone. Whatever.
Yeah.
Engagement helps no matter what. But we're gonna miss Bradley, and he's an important part of what we do here, and we're sorely gonna miss him. I think we might squeeze in one more, but probably not. So this is probably the end for Bradley. So Bradley, you get to take us out on this one.
Well, I will say thank you. It's been fun. Thank you to the listeners. Obviously, this has been a new experience for us. We're trying to figure out how to make modern media, is what I call it, not the old days of us sitting down and writing 2,000-word stories. So this is all new, and we're learning through it, and we appreciate you guys, tagging along for the ride. And yeah, we really appreciate the feedback, good, bad, and just hearing from you. Like in this case, what little bikes, beginner bikes you like. And it's fun to see, because, we're so immersed in it. We're seeing it day to day. But it's cool to hear what everyone else's opinion is, because you're all coming at it from different angles. And in the end, our whole goal is to just promote motorcycling. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people excited about motorcycles, to talk about motorcycles, and hopefully that's what we're able to do. And I think there's going to be still some really good conversations down the road that you guys will be able to run away with.
Hopefully we can have you as a guest at some point. So
there you go.
Anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next episode. See ya.
See you guys.
See you guys.